Yesterday, the Las Vegas Raiders made a big move by hiring John Spytek as their new general manager. But here's the thing, most of us don't know much about him. Sure, he's worked with teams like the Buccaneers, Eagles, Browns, and Broncos, but there's not a lot of detailed information about his style or decision-making process. Questions pop up. Has he made impactful draft picks before? What are his opinions on key player positions? To learn more, I did some digging. I checked out a few of Spytek's press conferences and podcasts, and I found some fascinating insights about how he evaluates players for free agency and the NFL draft. Today, I'll share some of those clips with you. Most of these come from one specific video, but trust me, it's pretty interesting. So, let's dive in. Now, one of the most important things for any general manager is their strategy for free agency and the NFL draft. Let me explain what I mean. For instance, if I'm scouting offensive tackles, I have a specific way of evaluating them. I focus on movement, how well they move on the field. That's something I prioritize because I believe it's crucial for an offensive tackle to succeed. Take Olu Fashanu, for example. In last year's NFL draft, he was my top-rated offensive tackle because of his exceptional movement. Some teams, like the Bengals, don't value movement as much. They've got players like Trent Brown and drafted Marius Mims, who aren't the most mobile tackles. But for me, movement is everything in a good offensive tackle. Spytek was recently asked about his approach to free agency and the draft, and he shared some interesting thoughts. Let's listen to what he had to say. It's definitely worth hearing. Here's something interesting Spytek said. You can't always get every player you want. And he's right. Sometimes the way a team sees its roster needs isn't how fans or analysts might see it. At the end of the day, he believes in focusing on one thing, finding good football players. But here's the twist. It's not just about talent. Spytek explained that in free agency, they prioritize players with high character, those who love the game, are highly competitive, and are fully committed to being great. He pointed out that chasing players who might have great physical traits but questionable character usually doesn't work out. These players often don't stick around or contribute in the long run. Spytek emphasized the importance of adding players who fit the team's culture. It's not just about filling spots on the roster. It's about finding players who truly belong and align with what the team is building. He even said they approach free agency and the draft the same way. They won't take just anyone. Instead, they're focused on finding players who match their philosophy. This got me thinking about how much high-character players matter. Spytek's comments reminded me of something I noticed recently at the Hula Bowl. I had the chance to talk to players from different schools across the country, and many of these guys are likely to be drafted or signed as undrafted free agents. What stood out to me was the behavior of some players. For example, after practice, while most players headed to the locker room, a few stayed behind to work on their technique with coaches. These are the players who show dedication. They go the extra mile to improve. I also observed how some players were enthusiastic and engaged during testing, while others didn't seem interested or even skipped it altogether. What I learned from this experience is that high-character players are rare, but they're incredibly valuable. They're the ones who put in the effort, show leadership, and genuinely love the game. Spytek clearly values this in free agency. He even mentioned that they don't focus on physical traits like speed or athleticism because those don't guarantee success. He's absolutely right. Having the right mindset and dedication often matters more than raw talent. John Spytek made a great point. Production on tape matters more than athletic traits. Let me explain why this approach makes sense. Take Olu Fashanu, for example. Not only did he have excellent movement, but his production in college at Penn State was outstanding. That success carried over when he stepped into the tackle role for the Jets last season. He was a star, a true example of a player whose skills translated perfectly from college to the NFL. Now let's compare that to someone like Tyree Wilson, whom the Raiders drafted 7th overall last year. Wilson was picked based on his physical traits. But here's the issue. Traits alone don't always pan out. Spytek's philosophy is clear. You prioritize players with proven production and strong character over flashy athleticism. And honestly, that's the right way to build a winning team. The Raiders have made some mistakes in this area. For example, Tyree Wilson was drafted more for his traits than his production. Another example is Byron Young, a defensive tackle who was fast, quick, and explosive. But his tape in college was underwhelming. The Raiders took him in the 3rd round when he likely would have still been available in the 5th or 6th round. These are examples of how overvaluing traits can backfire. Spytek's belief is refreshing. Focus on players who performed well in college and truly care about football. These are the players who are more likely to succeed in the NFL. Traits are nice to have, but production and character should always come first. Hearing Spytek talk about this gives me hope for the Raiders. It feels like he understands what it takes to build a winning team. Now, let's talk about one of the Raiders' biggest needs, the running back position. Outside of quarterback, which is a tricky position to get right, running back is the team's top offensive priority. Interestingly, Spytek has experience addressing similar challenges. During his 9 years with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, he was heavily involved in the team's draft decisions, especially over the past 2 or 3 years. He's been part of a process where the team focused on finding the right players to fill key roles, like running back. One thing I didn't mention earlier, but should, is how Spytek handles the draft process. At Tampa Bay, after the draft, the general manager usually addressed the media the very next day to discuss their picks. Spytek was a big part of these decisions, and it's clear that his influence is grounded in thoughtful, strategic planning. In the next section, we'll dive deeper into how Spytek evaluates running backs and what that could mean for the Raiders moving forward. Stay tuned, it's going to get even more interesting. John Spytek made a great point. Production on tape matters more than athletic traits. Let me explain why this approach makes sense. Take Olufashanu, for example. Not only did he have excellent movement, but his production in college at Penn State was outstanding. That success carried over when he stepped into the tackle role for the Jets last season. He was a star, a true example of a player whose skills translated perfectly from college to the NFL. Now, let's compare that to someone like Tyree Wilson, whom the Raiders drafted 7th overall last year. Wilson was picked based on his physical traits. But here's the issue. Traits alone don't always pan out. Spytek's philosophy is clear. You prioritize players with proven production and strong character over flashy athleticism. And honestly, that's the right way to build a winning team. The Raiders have made some mistakes in this area. For example, Tyree Wilson was drafted more for his traits than his production. Another example is Byron Young, a defensive tackle who was fast, quick, and explosive. But his tape in college was underwhelming. The Raiders took him in the 3rd round when he likely would have still been available in the 5th or 6th round. These are examples of how overvaluing traits can backfire. Spytek's belief is refreshing. Focus on players who performed well in college and truly care about football. These are the players who are more likely to succeed in the NFL. Traits are nice to have, but production and character should always come first. Hearing Spytek talk about this gives me hope for the Raiders. It feels like he understands what it takes to build a winning team. Now, let's talk about one of the Raiders' biggest needs, the running back position. Outside of quarterback, which is a tricky position to get right, running back is the team's top offensive priority. Interestingly, Spytek has experience addressing similar challenges. During his 9 years with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, he was heavily involved in the team's draft decisions, especially over the past 2 or 3 years. He's been part of a process where the team focused on finding the right players to fill key roles, like running back. One thing I didn't mention earlier but should is how Spytek handles the draft process. At Tampa Bay, after the draft, the general manager usually addressed the media the very next day to discuss their picks. Spytek was a big part of these decisions, and it's clear that his influence is grounded in thoughtful, strategic planning. In the next section, we'll dive deeper into how Spytek evaluates running backs and what that could mean for the Raiders moving forward. Stay tuned. It's going to get even more interesting. It's becoming clear that John Spytek had a much bigger role in shaping the Tampa Bay Buccaneers draft decisions than many might think. Over the last 2 years, he's been the one talking about the draft publicly, which suggests his input carried significant weight. In fact, even Buccaneers fans agree that Spytek's impact on their drafts was highly valued. It seems he wasn't just assisting, but actively setting up the draft board, influencing picks, and prioritizing certain players. His role as an assistant general manager was much more hands-on than you might expect, and his judgment likely shaped many key decisions. This isn't the case for every NFL team. For example, some general managers, like the Raiders' Dave Ziegler, might delegate free agency and player personnel decisions to someone like Champ Kelly, while taking full control of the draft themselves. But in Tampa Bay, it looks like Spytek was trusted enough to take charge of the draft process. Now, let's talk about running backs, a position Spytek has strong opinions on. He shared some insights about what he looks for in a running back. Here's what stood out. Spytek emphasized the importance of elusiveness and production over size or speed. He used an example from Tampa Bay's draft process, referencing a running back they evaluated, Bucky Brooks. Despite being a smaller back and not the fastest, running a 4.56 40-yard dash, Bucky Brooks stood out because of his ability to make defenders miss and stay on his feet after contact. Spytek mentioned that when they brought Brooks in for a visit, the running back confidently said, "The first guy doesn't tackle me." And that's exactly what Spytek looks for. He values running backs who are hard to bring down, regardless of their size or speed. For Spytek, it's all about production and toughness. Brooks averaged 6 yards per carry during his college career, whether at Minnesota or Oregon, and consistently proved he could get the job done. Even though he's under 200 pounds, he was hard to knock off his feet and always found ways to gain extra yards. What Spytek highlighted is that the best running backs are the ones who make life difficult for defenses. It doesn't matter if they're not the fastest or biggest. If they can consistently avoid tackles, gain yards, and score touchdowns, they're valuable. In Spytek's words, running backs who make defenders struggle to bring them down, whether they run a 4.3 or a 4.7, are the ones who truly excel. And that's the kind of mindset he brings to evaluating players, focusing on what really matters on the field. One of the most memorable things John Spytek shared was about his conversation with running back Bucky Irving. Despite being only 5 feet 9 inches and 190 pounds, Irving confidently told Spytek, "The first guy will not tackle me." Spytek hears from hundreds of players, agents, scouts, and coaches every year, reviewing thousands of reports, yet this statement stuck with him. That says a lot about Irving's confidence and skill. Spytek emphasized this again later, explaining that Irving's ability to consistently make defenders miss is a key quality. It's a powerful reminder that running backs come in all shapes and styles, and success isn't just about size or speed. It's about what you can do on the field. Over the years, Spytek's view of the running back position has evolved. There's no one-size-fits-all approach because running backs can excel in different ways. He gave examples of players with unique skills. Saquon Barkley, known for his vision and quick moves, he can spot a linebacker closing in on one gap, change direction instantly, and find an opening elsewhere, often breaking away for huge plays. Josh Jacobs. He might not have Barkley's agility, but he has great vision, toughness, and strength. He can break tackles and power through defenders for extra yards. Nick Chubb. A mix of power and agility, combining qualities of both Barkley and Jacobs. Christian McCaffrey. Excels at maintaining balance through contact and has sharp vision, making him incredibly effective. Spytek pointed out that not every running back is built the same, but all of them can succeed in their own way. Players like Irving, despite their smaller size, can be incredibly effective because they're hard to tackle, make defenders miss in space, and consistently gain yards. Looking at the upcoming draft class, Spytek sees a lot of potential talent. For example, Ashton Jeanty is a standout who might go in the top 15 picks, though Spytek doesn't think the Raiders should take him that high. Caleb Johnson from Iowa is another promising option who could be available later, possibly in the second or third round. Other names like Omarion Hampton from UNC and R.J. Harvey from UCF also show how deep this class of running backs is. Spytek's strategy seems to be finding value in players who may not go in the early picks but still have the skills to make a big impact. This approach reflects his belief that production and playmaking ability matter more than draft position or physical traits alone. This year, there are plenty of running backs in the draft who can make defenders miss and excel in space. John Spytek doesn't seem like the type to just draft a running back for the sake of it. Instead, he'll look for those sneaky picks, players who may not be flashy but can get the job done. If I were the Raiders, I'd aim to draft a running back in the second or third round and balance that with an offensive guard in the other round. For example, if you pick a running back in the second, go for a guard in the third, or vice versa. Now, let's talk about how Spytek values offensive linemen. He shared some thoughts on guards, specifically players the Buccaneers drafted recently, like Elijah Klein. Klein was a sixth-round pick out of UTEP, a school many people aren't familiar with. Despite flying under the radar, Klein has proven to be a big, strong, and hard-working player. Standing 6 feet 4 inches or 6 feet 5 inches and weighing 320 to 330 pounds, Klein is built solidly and plays with determination. Spytek highlighted how Klein's mindset sets him apart. He's not just out there to block, he's out there to dominate. His job is to protect the quarterback and win at the line of scrimmage, and he approaches it with consistency and focus. Despite coming from a smaller program, Klein has earned his spot every step of the way, and Spytek believes he'll fit perfectly in their team culture. Interestingly, Spytek also talked about the physical differences among offensive linemen. He noted that while some players might weigh the same, they can look completely different in terms of muscle and build. For example, Luke Kandra out of Cincinnati has an imposing physique with broad shoulders and strong traps, making him stand out as a lineman. On the other hand, some players at the same weight may not look as strong or well-built. Spytek values linemen who are not only strong but also well-conditioned and physically impressive. That's why players like Elijah Klein, 6 feet 4 inches, 320 pounds, and Grayson Barton, 6 feet 5 inches, 315 pounds, caught the Buccaneers' attention. They're both powerful, well-built, and ready to compete. One thing John Spytek emphasized in his interview is the importance of competition. He made it clear that the Buccaneers will bring in a lot of players to compete for positions, and the best performers will earn their spots. For example, even though they drafted Grayson Barton to play center, they wouldn't hesitate to move him to left guard if someone else proves to be a better center. This earn-it mindset shows Spytek values competition over simply handing out positions based on draft status. Spytek also prioritizes high-character players who genuinely love football. He's not just looking at physical traits but also at the passion and drive players bring to the game. This aligns with the confidence Bucky Irving displayed when he told Spytek, "The first guy will never tackle me." That statement shows belief in his abilities, and the tape backs it up. Spytek clearly values players with this mix of talent, character, and determination. Now, let's address a bit of criticism. The Buccaneers picked Grayson Barton over Jackson Paris-Johnson, and while Barton is a solid player, Johnson is arguably better. Barton was a great left tackle at Duke before transitioning to center, and he has the potential to be a Pro Bowl caliber player. However, Jackson Paris-Johnson has shown even greater promise. Johnson, who also plays center, is already performing at an elite level. In fact, some might argue he's the second-best center in the NFL right now, even before this season starts. Watching tape of players like Tyler Linderbaum, Creed Humphrey, and Drew Dahlman, it's clear that Johnson stands out. While Barton will be a very good player, Johnson has the potential to be the best center in the league. There are only a few players who can match the level of play Jackson Paris Johnson brings, and honestly, he might already be better than someone like Creed Humphrey. The only reason people might not say he's better yet is because Humphrey has a couple of years of NFL experience. But as time goes on, it's clear Johnson is on track to surpass him. Looking back at the draft, it's puzzling why the Buccaneers chose Grayson Barton over Jackson Paris Johnson. Johnson's tape at Oregon was phenomenal. He didn't seem to lose a single rep, dominated his opponents, and played with flawless technique. Maybe concerns about injury history influenced the decision, but there's no denying that Johnson is destined to be an elite player. Barton will likely have a strong career, but choosing him over someone as dominant as Johnson raises some questions. Another decision that stood out was when the Buccaneers took Kyle Trask in the second round a few years ago. Maybe they saw him as a future starting quarterback who just needed time to develop. Only time will tell if that gamble pays off. Lastly, John Spytek shared his approach to building a scouting department and the importance of consistency. He explained that for the team to succeed, everyone in the scouting and coaching departments must be on the same page. Whether it's grading players, evaluating character, or identifying the traits they value, everyone needs to speak the same language. Spytek also emphasized that stability is key. Constantly replacing scouts or coaches makes it harder to establish a clear vision for what the team values. Consistency allows everyone to focus on their roles and work together seamlessly. He even mentioned how the team's most recent free agency period felt calmer and more efficient because of this stability, which helped them find quality players without the usual chaos. In short, Spytek values high-character players and a well-organized system. By keeping things steady and clear, the Buccaneers aim to build a strong foundation for long-term success. If you keep changing your scouting department every couple of years, you're basically starting from scratch each time. The same goes for coaching. Consistency is key. John Spytek is absolutely right about that. The more I hear from Spytek, the more I realize how much of an impact he's had on the Buccaneers. Over the last decade, the Buccaneers have become a well-built organization. It wasn't always perfect. They didn't always pick the right quarterback, like when they went with Jameis Winston. But even then, they built a solid roster around him. The moment they replaced Winston with Tom Brady, they won the Super Bowl. In fact, they made it to back-to-back Super Bowls, with the defense ranked as the best in the league. Spytek played a huge role in building that success, and it shows how important consistency is, not just in coaching but also in scouting and the front office. Unfortunately, the Raiders haven't had that kind of stability. Look at what's happened to the Raiders over the past 5 years. It's been a mess. Reggie McKenzie was around for a while, but near the end of his time they fired Jack Del Rio. Then, a year later, McKenzie was out, and they brought in John Gruden. After Gruden, Mike Mayock came in, but he only lasted 3 years before Gruden had to resign mid-season. Rich Bisaccia stepped up, but he was replaced by Josh McDaniels and Dave Ziegler. Mayock was let go, and then Tom Telesco came in, did a great job, and got fired too. The Raiders' inconsistency has been all over the place. It's no surprise that someone like Ben Johnson didn't want to coach the Raiders. But here's the hope. If Spytek comes in and sticks around for a few years, the team could finally build some stability. Whether the next coach is Pete Carroll, Cliff Kingsbury, a rumored option, or someone else, the key is to give them time to build. Let them work for 3 or 4 years and see how things pan out. If things still don't work out, at least Spytek will have built a strong roster, making it easier to bring in the next Kyle Shanahan, Sean McVay, or Ben Johnson-level coach to take over and succeed. We'll just have to wait and see what happens. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. This video took a long time to make, but I enjoyed putting it together. Don't forget to give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and I'll catch you next time with another video.